The first time Eli Navarro looked at me like that, the power was already out, and I told myself it was just the dark playing tricks on both of us. That's the part one keep coming back to, months later, whenever I try to explain how any of this started. Not the storm. Not the thunder that cracked so loud it rattled the windows of my parents' old farmhouse. Just the way Eli's eyes found mine across the kitchen table, lit only by a single candle, and didn't look away first. I did. I always did, back then. My name is Caleb Whitfield, and for most of my life, Eli Navarro was just my older brother's best friend, a fixture of my childhood the way the oak tree in our backyard was a fixture, or the creek that ran behind the Hendersons' property. He was always there. At every birthday, every 4th of July barbecue, every lazy summer afternoon when my brother Dean would drag him along on some half-baked adventure and I'd trail behind them both, too young to keep up, too stubborn to be left behind. Eli was 3 years older than me. When I was 14 and awkward, he was 17 and effortless, the kind of easy, unbothered confidence that made grown men nod at him with respect and made girls in town go quiet when he walked into a room. I used to watch him from a distance and think, I want to be like that someday. I didn't have the language yet for what I actually felt. I was 14. I didn't know that admiration could curdle into something else if you let it sit too long. By the time I was 20 and home from college for the summer, Eli was 23, living 2 towns over, working construction with his uncle's crew, and still, somehow, impossibly, showing up at our house like he'd never left. Dean had moved to the city for a job in logistics, which meant Eli didn't have his usual excuse to be around anymore. He came anyway. My mother adored him. My father called him the son who actually calls. And I had spent 6 years very carefully not thinking about why my stomach dropped every time his truck pulled into our gravel driveway. That summer, the summer everything changed, started like any other. Hot days, the smell of cut grass, cicadas screaming in the tree line at dusk. I was working part-time at the hardware store in town, saving money for my last year of school, and Eli would sometimes stop by on his way home from a job site, still dusty, still smelling like sawdust and sun, and buy a bottle of water he didn't need just to have a reason to stand at my register for 5 minutes. "You're getting taller," he told me once, in June, leaning against the counter like he owned it. "I'm 20. I stopped growing 3 years ago." Ha! He looked at me for a second too long. Coulda fooled me. I didn't know what to do with a sentence like that. I still don't, if I'm honest. I rang up his water and told him to have a good one, and he left, and I stood there for a full minute after the bell above the door stopped jingling, feeling like I'd missed something important. The storm came on a Friday in late July, the kind of storm the local news spends all day warning you about, a wall of green-black cloud rolling in from the west, the air going thick and still in that eerie way that means something's coming. My parents were 40 minutes away at my aunt's 50th birthday party, staying over because of the weather, which meant I had the house to myself. Or I would have, if Eli hadn't texted an hour before the first raindrop fell. "Eli, you home alone tonight?" Me, "Yeah, parents are at Aunt Carol's till tomorrow." Eli, "Storm supposed to be bad. Mind if I crash on your couch? My place floods when it rains like this." That wasn't exactly true. I'd been to Eli's apartment, and it sat on solid ground 2 streets up from the river, nowhere near flood-prone, but I didn't call him on it. I just typed back "sure, come on over," and spent the next 40 minutes doing something humiliating and entirely involuntary, which was cleaning my room like it mattered, like Eli Navarro was going to inspect my bookshelf and judge me for it. He showed up right as the first fat drop started hitting the porch roof, hair already damp, a duffel bag over one shoulder like he'd planned to stay longer than a night. I let him in and tried very hard to look unbothered. "Storm's gonna be a bad one," he said, dropping his bag by the stairs. "Half the county's already lost power. We've got candles. And my dad's generator, if it comes to that. Look at you. Prepared." He smiled at me, that easy, crooked smile that had been quietly dismantling me since I was 14, and something in my chest did the thing it always did around him, that specific ache I trained myself not to name. We ordered pizza before the storm got bad enough to knock out the delivery driver's nerve, and ate it at the kitchen table while rain started hammering the windows in long, hard sheets. Eli told me about a guy on his crew who'd nearly fallen off a roof that week, and I told him about a customer at the hardware store who tried to return a bag of mulch he'd clearly already used, and for a while it felt normal, easy, the way it always had. Then the power went out. The whole house went black at once, the hum of the refrigerator cutting off so suddenly the silence felt loud. Outside, thunder rolled long and low, and somewhere upstairs a window rattled in its frame. "I got it," I said, already reaching for the drawer where my mom kept the candles and matches, moving through the dark kitchen on memory alone. My hands were shaking a little, not from fear of the storm. I've never been afraid of storms. I think I was shaking because I knew, somehow, that the dark was about to change something. I lit one candle, then a second, setting them on the table between us. The light was small and gold and it made everything feel closer than it was. Eli's face across the table, half lit, half shadowed, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "You good?" he asked quietly. "Yeah. Just," I sat back down across from him. "Storms like this used to freak me out when I was a kid. You remember? You and Dean used to tell me it was just God moving furniture." Eli laughed, low and warm, the sound doing something unfair to my pulse. "I forgot about that. Dean made that up to shut you up, you know that, right? You wouldn't stop crying at your own birthday party. I was 6. You were dramatic." He was smiling, but his eyes had gone softer, steadier, fixed on me in a way that made the kitchen feel smaller than it was. "You're still a little dramatic." "Thanks. It's not a bad thing." "A beat. I like it, actually." The candle flickered between us. Thunder cracked somewhere close, loud enough that I felt it in the floor, and I didn't look away from him, and he didn't look away from me, and for 5 long seconds neither of us said anything at all. It was the first time in 6 years I let myself hold his gaze instead of breaking it first. "Eli." "Yeah." I didn't have an end to that sentence. I don't think I ever had one. I just knew that something in the air between us had shifted, quietly and completely, the way weather shifts before you've even noticed the sky changing color. "Nothing," I said. "Never mind." He didn't push. He just kept looking at me, that same unreadable warmth in his face, and outside the storm kept tearing itself apart over our heads, and I remember thinking, very clearly, I am in so much trouble. We ended up in the living room an hour later, sitting on opposite ends of the couch with a battery lantern glowing on the coffee table, half watching the storm through the window because there was nothing else to do with the TV dead. Eli had his feet up, one arm slung along the back of the couch, close enough that if I leaned back the wrong way my shoulder would land against his hand. I leaned back the wrong way. Neither of us moved. His fingers were maybe 2 inches from my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth of them even without contact, and I sat there frozen, hyper-aware of my own heartbeat, waiting to see what he'd do. What he did was shift his hand, slow and deliberate, until it rested against my shoulder for real. Not grabbing. Not pulling me closer. Just resting there, warm and steady, like it belonged. "Is this okay?" he asked, voice low enough that it barely cleared the sound of the rain. "Yeah." My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "Yeah, it's okay." We sat like that for a long time. Long enough that my heart rate finally settled into something almost normal. Long enough that I let myself lean, just slightly, into the weight of his hand. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually, staring at the flickering lantern instead of at him, because I didn't trust myself to say it while looking at his face. "Anything. Why'd you really come over tonight? Your place doesn't flood." The silence that followed lasted long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual ease. "Because I've been looking for an excuse to be alone with you for about 2 years now," he said, "and a storm felt like as good a reason as any." I turned to look at him. In the lantern light his face looked open in a way I'd never seen it, no easy smile, no crooked confidence, just something quiet and a little scared, like he'd surprised himself by saying it out loud. "Eli. You don't have to say anything." He pulled his hand back from my shoulder, and I felt the loss of it immediately, sharply. I probably shouldn't have said that. "You're Dean's little brother. I don't know what I'm doing, honestly." "Forget it. Don't." I said it fast, before I could talk myself out of it. "Don't take it back." He went still. "Caleb. I've been in love with you since I was 14 years old," I said, and once it was out I couldn't believe I'd actually said it. 6 years of careful, silent denial undone in one sentence in a dark living room during a thunderstorm. I didn't know what to call it back then. I do now. The rain kept hammering the window. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled long and slow, further away now, the storm finally starting to move on. Eli looked at me like I'd knocked the air out of him, and then he moved, closer, slow, giving me every chance to stop him, until there were only inches between us, until I could feel his breath, warm and unsteady, against my mouth. "Tell me if I'm wrong about this," he said quietly. "You're not wrong." He kissed me then, soft at first, careful, like he thought I might change my mind, and when I didn't, when I kissed him back, one hand finding the front of his shirt like I needed something to hold on to, he made a low sound against my mouth that undid something in my chest I'd kept locked up for 6 long years. It wasn't long. It wasn't much. Just one kiss, gentle and certain, in candlelight, in a storm, in a house that had known us both since we were children. But when we finally pulled back, foreheads still resting together, both of us breathing like we'd been running, I understood that nothing about my life was going to look the same after that night. "What happens now?" I whispered. Eli didn't answer right away. He just brushed his thumb once, slowly, along my jaw, like he was trying to memorize the shape of my face in the dark. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to pretend anymore." Neither did I. What neither of us knew, what neither of us could have known, sitting in that candlelit living room with the storm finally breaking outside, was that the hardest part wasn't the almost, and it wasn't the confession, and it wasn't even the kiss. The hardest part was still ahead of us. Because in 3 days, Dean was coming home. And Dean didn't know the first thing about any of this. Dean came home on a Tuesday, and I spent the 3 days before that pretending I wasn't counting them down like a sentence. Eli and I hadn't talked about what we were. We'd talked around it, texts that lingered a little too long after midnight, one afternoon at the reservoir where our hands brushed and neither of us pulled away first, a second kiss on my front porch that lasted longer than the first one and left me leaning against the doorframe for a full minute after his taillights disappeared down the road. But we hadn't said the word. Boyfriend. Together. Anything. It was like both of us understood that naming it too soon might scare it off, so instead we just existed in this warm, quiet, undefined space, stealing hours whenever we could. I told myself that was enough. I told myself a lot of things that summer that turned out not to be true. My mother threw together a welcome home dinner the night Dean arrived, pot roast, her good tablecloth, the whole production, and Eli was there, of course, because Eli was always there, except now every time he looked at me across the table I felt it land somewhere under my ribs instead of just in my chest. Dean hugged him first, the way he always did, clapping him on the back like they hadn't seen each other in a year instead of 3 months. "You've been keeping my little brother company," Dean said, dropping into the chair beside me, grinning. "Mom says you've practically moved in. Somebody's gotta make sure he doesn't burn the house down," Eli said, easy as anything, and I marveled, genuinely marveled, at how effortlessly he could do that. Sit 2 feet from me, knowing what his mouth felt like against mine, and talk to my brother like nothing in the world had changed. I wasn't as good at it. I picked at my food and answered questions a half-second too late and twice caught my mother giving me a curious look across the table, like she could sense something was off but couldn't place what. Eli caught my eye once, briefly, a silent "You okay?" That I answered with a small nod I didn't entirely mean. After dinner, Dean wanted to catch up properly, beers on the back porch, old stories, the kind of easy brotherly ritual I usually loved being part of. That night I found myself on the outside of it for the first time in my life, watching Eli laugh at something Dean said, watching the two of them fall back into a rhythm built over 15 years of friendship, and feeling, absurdly, like an intruder in my own backyard. "You're quiet tonight," Dean said around 11, when Eli had gone inside for another round. "Everything good?" "Yeah. Just tired." It wasn't a lie, exactly. I was tired of doing math in my head every time Eli and I were in the same room, tired of translating every glance into a language only the two of us spoke, tired of not knowing what any of it meant. Dean studied me a second too long, the way older brothers do when they suspect something but can't yet prove it. "You tell me if something was going on, right?" My stomach dropped somewhere near my shoes. "Like what?" "I don't know. Girl trouble. Whatever." He shrugged, easy, oblivious. "You've just seemed different this summer." I laughed it off, said something about school stress, and the moment passed. But it left a residue I couldn't shake, the sharp, sudden understanding that this thing with Eli wasn't a private garden the two of us could tend in secret forever. Eventually someone was going to walk into it. And I didn't know yet whether that person would be furious, or heartbroken, or something worse, indifferent, like it hadn't mattered enough to notice. The next 2 weeks were a strange, aching kind of good. Dean being home meant Eli came around less, the two of them off fishing, or at the batting cages, or drinking beer in Dean's truck bed the way they'd done since high school, and every hour Eli spent with my brother instead of me sat like a stone in my chest, heavy and unreasonable and impossible to explain to anyone, including myself. I hated how much I hated it. Eli owed Dean nothing less than the friendship they'd always had. I knew that. I told myself that on repeat, lying awake at night listening for the sound of Eli's truck in the driveway that wasn't going to come, not that night, because he was staying at Dean's new apartment in the city for the weekend, and I was here, alone, drowning in a jealousy I had no right to feel and couldn't seem to stop feeling anyway. We texted, but it wasn't the same. Texts couldn't carry the particular warmth of his hand on my shoulder, or the way his voice dropped low when it was just the two of us. And somewhere in that stretch of half their conversations, I started to convince myself of something ugly and quiet, that maybe what happened during the storm had been exactly that, a storm. A singular, contained event that made sense in candlelight and rain and made less and less sense in the ordinary daylight of Eli's actual life, the one that included my brother, and a construction crew that wouldn't understand, and a small town that talked. Maybe, I told myself, he regretted it. I didn't ask him. That was my mistake, the first real one. Instead of asking, I did what I'd always done best, I pulled back. I let his texts sit an hour before I answered them. I found reasons to be busy when he suggested meeting up. I told myself I was protecting myself from getting hurt, when really I was guaranteeing it. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Did I do something? Eli asked, the first time we were alone again, a Wednesday evening in early August, both of us sitting on the tailgate of his truck at the edge of the reservoir, the sky doing that long golden thing it does before dusk. He'd driven 40 minutes to see me and I'd spent the whole drive over there rehearsing ways to keep him at arm's length. No. I've just been busy. Caleb. He said my name the way he always did when he wanted the truth instead of the easy answer, quiet, direct, patient in a way that used to comfort me and now made my chest ache. Talk to me. I looked out at the water instead of at him. You've barely had time for me since Dean got back. That's not fair. Dean's my best friend. I've known him 15 years, I'm not gonna just, he stopped himself, exhaled, tried again, softer. That doesn't mean anything's changed with you. I thought that was obvious. It's not obvious to me. My voice came out sharper than I meant it to, all the jealousy and fear of the last 2 weeks finally spilling out sideways. I don't know what we are, Eli. We kissed twice and then you disappeared into your regular life like nothing happened, and I'm just supposed to sit around waiting to find out if I mattered or if I was just a storm. A thing that happened because the power was out and neither of us knew what else to do with the dark. The silence after that was long enough to hurt. Is that what you think this is? Eli's voice had gone very quiet, very still. You think I kissed you because the lights were out? I don't know what to think. You haven't told me anything. I haven't told you anything because I'm terrified, Caleb. He turned to face me fully, and there was something raw in his expression that stripped away all his usual ease. You're my best friend's little brother. If this goes wrong, if I lose you, if Dean finds out and it goes wrong with him too, I lose both of you. I lose 15 years of family in one afternoon. So yeah, maybe I've been careful. Maybe I've been scared. That doesn't mean it wasn't real. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But 2 weeks of silence and second-guessing had built a wall in me that one honest sentence wasn't going to knock down, not that easily, not that fast. I need you to actually choose, I said. Not just when it's easy. Not just in the dark. Something shifted in his face, hurt, maybe, or resolve, I couldn't tell which. And if I do? If I choose this, choose you, out loud, where people can see it, are you gonna be able to handle what that costs? Because it's not just me who has something to lose here. I didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. And the sun kept sinking behind the water, gold turning to orange turning to a deep, bruised purple, and neither of us said another word for a long time, the space between us on that tailgate feeling wider than it ever had. That was the night I understood that falling for your brother's best friend doesn't end with one kiss in a storm. It was only the beginning of a much harder question, whether either of us was brave enough to survive what came after it. 3 days later, Dean called me while I was at work, his voice tight in a way I'd never heard before. Hey, he said. Can you talk? I need to ask you something. About Eli. My hand went cold around the phone. What about Eli? I asked, keeping my voice as level as I could manage while my heart tried to climb out through my throat. I'd stepped into the back room of the hardware store, past the paint mixer and the shelves of drop cloths, phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. Dean was quiet for a second. In the background I could hear the hum of highway noise, he was driving somewhere. He's been weird lately. Distracted. I called him last night to see if he wanted to grab dinner and he blew me off, which, I don't know, Eli doesn't do that. Not with me. A pause. You two have been spending a lot of time together this summer. Did something happen? Did you guys get into it about something? The relief that flooded through me was so sudden and so total that I had to lean against the paint-splattered counter to stay upright. He didn't know. Of course he didn't know, how could he, when Eli and I hadn't even told each other what we were, let alone anyone else. Dean had noticed a shift in his best friend and, in the way of older brothers everywhere, had immediately assumed it had something to do with me, without landing anywhere near the actual truth. We're fine, I said, which felt like both a lie and the truest thing I'd said all week. I think he's just got a lot going on. Work stuff. Huh. Dean didn't sound entirely convinced, but he let it go, the way he always did. My brother had never been the type to dig where he wasn't invited. Well, if you talk to him, tell him to stop being a stranger. I missed the guy. Yeah. I will. I hung up and stood alone in the back room for a long moment, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and turpentine, feeling like I'd just stepped back from the edge of something without ever fully understanding how close I'd come to falling. I called Eli that night. Not texted, called, which we almost never did, both of us products of a generation that treated an actual phone call like a small emergency. He picked up on the second ring. Hey. His voice was cautious, careful in a way that hadn't existed between us 2 weeks ago. Everything okay? Dean called me today. He thinks something's wrong with you. Says you blew him off for dinner. A long exhale on the other end of the line. I didn't feel like pretending everything's normal when it isn't. Eli. I've been thinking about what you said. At the reservoir. His voice had dropped into something quieter, more honest than I'd heard from him in days. About choosing. You were right. I've been trying to keep this small and safe and easy, and it's not fair to you, and it's not actually who I want to be, either. I'm just scared, Caleb. I've never done this before. Any of it. Liking a guy, liking my best friend's little brother, all of it at once. I don't have a manual for this. I sat down on the edge of my bed, throat tight. You think I have a manual? I've been in love with you since I was 14 and I still don't know what I'm doing. That surprised a small, broken laugh out of him. 14. God. I used to watch you and Dean leave for the reservoir without me and just ache. I didn't have a word for it back then. I just knew I wanted to be wherever you were. I wish you'd told me sooner. Would it have changed anything? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear it sooner. Maybe I needed the storm to make me stop being a coward about it. A breath. I'm not trying to be a coward now. I want you to know that. I need a little time to figure out how to do this right. Not for me. For you. You deserve better than sneaking around like what we have is something to be ashamed of. Something in my chest loosened, just slightly, for the first time in 2 weeks. Okay. 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 Take your time. Just, don't disappear on me again. That's the part that scared me. Not that you needed space. That you went quiet instead of telling me why. I won't do that again, he said, and I believed him, mostly because of how much it seemed to cost him to say it out loud. I promise. We stayed on the phone another hour, talking about nothing important, his crew, a dog he'd almost adopted and then didn't, a memory from when I was 16 and he'd taught me to drive stick in the church parking lot and I'd stalled the truck into a light pole. It was easy again, the way it used to be, except now there was a current running underneath all of it that hadn't been there before, warm and steady and a little bit frightening in how much I wanted to hold on to it. Things were better after that. Not perfect, Eli was still careful about how much time we spent together when Dean was around, and I was still working through the ugly little habit of assuming the worst whenever he went quiet for a few hours. But we were talking now, really talking, in a way we hadn't managed since the night of the storm. He started finding small, deliberate ways to close the distance, a hand at the small of my back when no one was looking, a long look across a crowded kitchen at my parents' Sunday dinner that lasted just a beat too long to be nothing, a note left on my windshield at work that just said thinking about you, don't tell your brother with a small drawn heart that made me laugh out loud in the parking lot. I let myself believe, for about 2 weeks, that the hardest part was behind us. That the storm had been the crisis, and Dean's phone call had been the near miss, and everything from here would just be the slow, sweet work of 2 people falling for each other in the open instead of the dark. I was wrong about that too. Because Dean came home again on a Saturday in late August, unannounced this time, a surprise visit for our mother's birthday, and walked into the kitchen at 8 in the morning to find Eli's truck in the driveway and Eli himself standing at our stove making coffee in a t-shirt I recognized, because it was mine. I heard the front door before I saw him. I came down the stairs already dressed, already too late, and found my brother standing frozen in the kitchen doorway, staring at Eli, and then at me, and then back at Eli again, his face doing something I'd never seen it do before, confusion sliding, in real time, into a dawning, devastating understanding. Dean, Eli said carefully, setting down the coffee pot. Hey, man, I didn't know you were coming. That's my brother's shirt, Dean said, not looking at Eli at all now. He was looking at me. Caleb. What's going on? The kitchen went very still. Outside, a car passed on the road, its engine fading into the distance, and I stood there on the bottom stair with my heart slamming against my ribs, understanding that there was no version of the next 60 seconds that didn't change everything. Dean, I started, I can explain. Then explain, he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle of the word, half anger, half something that sounded a lot like hurt. Because right now it looks like the two of you have been lying to me all summer, and I need you to tell me I'm wrong. I looked at Eli. Eli looked back at me, steady, unflinching, the way he promised he wouldn't be a coward anymore. You're not wrong, Eli said quietly, before I could get a single word out. We should have told you sooner. I'm sorry it happened like this. But I'm not sorry it happened. Dean's jaw worked for a long moment, and then, without another word, he turned and walked straight back out the front door, letting it slam so hard the windows rattled. Nobody moved for a long moment after the door slammed. The coffee pot sat forgotten on the counter, steam curling up into the silence, and I stood frozen on the bottom stair like my legs had stopped belonging to me. Caleb. Eli's voice cut through at first, low and urgent. Go after him. What am I supposed to say? I don't know. Something true. He crossed the kitchen and took my hand for just a second, quick and fierce, like he needed me to feel it before I walked out that door. Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere. Go. I found Dean in the driveway, sitting on the tailgate of his truck with his head in his hands, the same posture I'd seen Eli in 100 times growing up, and it struck me all at once how alike they were, how much my brother and the man I loved shared the same bones underneath their different lives. Dean looked up when he heard the screen door, his eyes red-rimmed, and for a second neither of us said anything at all. How long? He finally asked. Since the storm. A few weeks ago. I stayed a careful distance away, hands shoved in my pockets, unsure if I was allowed closer. I didn't plan it, Dean. Neither of us did. It just happened. He's my best friend. Dean's voice was rough, scraped raw. 15 years, Caleb. I've told him things I've never told anybody. And you're my little brother. I used to carry you on my shoulders. I taught you to ride a bike in this driveway. He gestured at the gravel beneath us like it was evidence of something. And you two have been, what, sneaking around behind my back all summer. Lying to my face. We weren't trying to hurt you. Well, you did. He looked away, jaw tight, blinking hard at the tree line like he could will himself not to feel whatever he was feeling. You did hurt me. Both of you. I sat down on the tailgate beside him, close enough to matter, far enough to be safe. I've loved him since I was 14 years old, Dean. I didn't ask for it. I spent 6 years hating myself for it, actually, wishing I could just turn it off and be normal about it, whatever that means. And then this summer he looked at me and I couldn't pretend anymore. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. I know it's a lot to take in all at once. But I'm not going to apologize for loving him. I'm only going to apologize for how you found out. Dean was quiet for a long time, long enough that a pair of crows took off from the oak tree at the edge of the yard, their wings loud in the stillness. Is he good to you? He finally asked, so quietly I almost missed it. The question caught me off guard. What? Eli. Is he good to you? Because I know that man better than I know myself, and if he's playing games with you, if this is some summer thing he's gonna walk away from. He's not playing games. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He's scared, actually. Scared of exactly this, losing you, losing the family he's had since he was a kid. He held off on telling you for weeks because he didn't want to hurt you. This wasn't easy for either of us, Dean. It still isn't. Dean rubbed both hands down his face, exhaling hard. I don't know what to do with this. You don't have to know right now. I walked in on my little brother wearing my best friend's. He stopped himself, made a frustrated sound low in his throat. I need some time. I'm not saying I hate you, or I hate him, or any of that. I just need to not be standing in that kitchen right now. Okay. I said it gently, because I understood, more than I wanted to, what it felt like to have your whole picture of your life rearrange itself in the space of a single morning. Take whatever time you need. He got up, walked around to the driver's side of his truck, and paused there for a second with his hand on the door, not looking at me. For what it's worth, he said, I always thought you two liked each other more than made sense for just being friends of the family. I just never let myself think about what that actually meant. Then he got in his truck and drove away, gravel spitting under his tires, and I sat alone on the empty driveway for a long time before I went back inside. The days that followed were some of the hardest of that whole summer, harder in some ways than the storm itself, because at least the storm had an ending you could see coming. This didn't. Dean didn't call. He didn't answer when I called him. My mother noticed the tension immediately, mothers always do, and cornered me in the kitchen 3 days later, arms crossed, giving me the look she'd been giving me since I was small enough to hide behind furniture when I'd broken something. Something happened between you and your brother, she said. And I think it has something to do with why Eli hasn't been around. I hadn't planned to tell her that way, in the kitchen, with dish soap still on my hands, but I was tired of secret swallowing up every room I walked into. So I told her. All of it, the storm, the years before the storm, what Dean had walked in on, the silence since. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting through something I couldn't quite name, and when I finished she was quiet for a long moment. I've known Eli Navarro since he was 12 years old, she finally said. I've watched that boy grow up in this kitchen. And I've watched the way he looks at you since you were both a lot younger than either of you realize. She reached over and squeezed my hand, and her eyes were bright. I love you exactly the way I always have. That's not a question. It was never going to be a question. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until I was crying into my mother's shoulder in our kitchen at 9 in the morning, the two of us standing there while the coffee maker beeped uselessly behind us, forgotten. Your brother loves you too, she added, once I'd pulled myself together. He's just proud, and he's hurt, and those two things make men do foolish, silent things. Give him time. He'll come around. He always does. Eli came by that evening, quiet and uncertain in a way that didn't suit him, and found me sitting on the porch steps watching the sun go down the same way it had the night at the reservoir, except this time he sat down right beside me, no distance at all, his shoulder pressed against mine like he needed the contact to steady himself. Any word from him? He asked. No. You? No. He exhaled slowly. I called him about 6 times. He's not answering me either. He looked over at me, something fragile in his expression. I keep thinking about what he said in the driveway. About losing me being like losing family. I never wanted to make him choose between his best friend and his brother. He's not choosing, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it yet myself. He's just figuring out how to hold both at once. That takes some people longer than others. Eli reached over and laced his fingers through mine, right there on the porch, in full view of the road, of the neighbors, of anyone who might drive by, no hiding, no careful distance, none of the caution that had defined the whole summer up to that point. I'm not letting go of this, he said, quiet and certain. Whatever happens with Dean. I need you to know that. I know. Do you? He turned to look at me fully, his thumb moving slowly over my knuckles. Because I spent 6 years watching you grow up too scared to say anything, telling myself it wasn't my place, that you deserved someone who could figure his own self out before dragging you into it. I'm done being scared, Caleb. I choose you. Out loud. However this shakes out with Dean. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and we sat there together until the sky went from gold to violet to a deep, quiet blue, the porch light flickering on automatically above us, and for the first time since the morning in the kitchen, I let myself believe that whatever came next, we would face it together instead of in separate silences. That belief lasted exactly 4 days. Because on the 5th day, Dean showed up at Eli's apartment, not mine, and I didn't find out what happened between them until it was already over. I found out about it the way you find out about most important things that happen without you, secondhand, badly, and far too late to do anything but sit with it. Eli called me that night, his voice strange, thick, like he'd been crying or trying hard not to. "Can you come over?" I drove the 40 minutes to his apartment faster than I should have, my mind running through every terrible possibility on the way. Dean had shown up swinging, Dean had shown up to end the friendship for good, Dean had said something so cutting that 15 years of history had come apart in a single conversation. By the time I got there my hands were shaking on the wheel. Eli opened the door before I even knocked, like he'd been standing on the other side of it waiting. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair a mess from running his hands through it too many times, and for one terrible second I thought the worst had happened. "What did he say?" I asked, stepping inside. Eli didn't answer right away. He just pulled me into a hug so tight it nearly knocked the breath out of me, holding on like he needed proof I was actually there, and when he finally spoke his voice was rough with something I couldn't immediately identify. "He came here to yell at me," Eli said into my shoulder. That's what I thought was gonna happen. I had this whole speech ready, all these things I was gonna say about how I never meant to hurt him, how this wasn't some betrayal, how I'd choose you and still want to keep him too if he'd let me. He pulled back just enough to look at me, and I realized, slowly, that what I was seeing in his face wasn't devastation. It was something closer to disbelief. He didn't yell. What did he do? He sat on my couch for like 10 minutes without saying anything. And then he told me about the drive back from your parents' place, how he pulled over on the side of the road because he couldn't see straight, he was so angry. Not angry that it was me, he said. Angry that nobody trusted him enough to just tell him the truth. He said he spent 15 years being the guy people came to with hard things, and the one time it actually touched his own family, he was the last to know. I felt something in my chest crack open at that, not surprise, exactly, but a kind of recognition. Of course that was what had actually wounded him. Not who I loved. That we hadn't trusted him enough to say it out loud. And then? I asked quietly. And then he asked me if I was serious about you. Like, actually serious, not summer fling serious. Eli's voice caught. I told him I've been in love with you since before I was ready to admit it to myself, and that I'm not going anywhere, no matter what he decided about us. And he got quiet again. And then he said, Eli stopped, pressed the heel of his hand briefly against his eyes. He said, you'd better treat him right, because if you break his heart, best friend or not, I will end you. And then he hugged me. Just like that. 15 years of friendship and one hug and it was like none of it had ever been in danger at all. I stood there in Eli's doorway, my own eyes stinging, trying to process the fact that the conversation I'd been dreading for days had already happened without me, had already resolved itself into something so much gentler than either of us had feared. He's not mad? I asked. He's hurt. Those aren't the same thing. Eli reached for my hand, threading our fingers together the way he had on the porch. He said he needs time to get used to the idea. Said family dinners are gonna be weird for a while. But he also said, a small, disbelieving laugh escaped him. He said if I hurt you, he'd have grounds. Those were his exact words. Grounds. Like we're already something official enough to have grounds. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 5 days straight, and something in my chest finally unclenched. So we're okay? All three of us? I think so. I think it's gonna take work. I think your brother's gonna need some space, and some time, and probably a few more conversations that are gonna feel awkward as hell. But he's not walking away. From either of us. Dean called me 2 days later. I remember exactly where I was standing when the phone rang, in the driveway, keys in hand, on my way to see Eli, and I remember how my heart lurched into my throat at his name on the screen. Hey, he said, when I picked up. His voice was careful, a little rough around the edges, but it was his voice, familiar and steady in the way it had been my whole life. You got a minute? Yeah. Always. I talked to Eli. I know. He told me. A pause. I'm still working through it, Caleb. I won't lie to you and say I'm totally fine, because I'm not yet. It's a lot to rearrange in my head all at once, my little brother, my best friend, all these years I didn't see it happening right in front of me. He exhaled slowly. But I love you. Both of you, actually, which is a weird thing to say out loud, but it's true. And I don't want to lose either of you over something that, when I really sit with it, isn't actually about me at all. My throat tightened. Thank you for saying that. Don't thank me yet. I'm still gonna need you both to sit through some deeply uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinners while I figure out how to be normal about this. There was a faint, familiar warmth creeping back into his voice, the ghost of the brother I'd always known. But yeah. We're okay. We're gonna be okay. I stood in the driveway after we hung up, looking down the road toward the reservoir, toward Eli's apartment, toward the whole unmapped shape of whatever came next, and for the first time all summer I let myself believe, completely, that we'd actually made it through the hardest part. I was wrong about that too, not because anything else went wrong, but because I hadn't yet understood that the hardest part was never Dean finding out at all. The hardest part, the part that actually took courage, was still ahead of us, learning how to build an ordinary, unremarkable, daylight kind of love, after 6 years of hiding it and one whole summer of almost losing it. Autumn came slow that year, the way it always does in our part of the county, the heat breaking in stages, the cicadas going quiet one by one, the oak tree in our backyard turning gold at the edges before it turned anywhere else. By the time the leaves really started to fall, I was back at school for my last semester, and Eli was still 2 towns over, and the distance between us had become just that, distance, ordinary and manageable, nothing like the fear that had once made us hide in candlelight. We talked every night. Not because we had to, not out of obligation, but because it had become the shape of my days, waking up to a good morning text, falling asleep to his voice on the phone, learning the small, unglamorous rhythms of loving someone in the daylight instead of just the dark. It wasn't cinematic anymore, most days. It was laundry and grocery lists and him telling me about a bad day on a job site, and me complaining about a professor who didn't know how to run office hours. It was better than cinematic. It was real. Dean and I found our footing too, slower than I expected, faster than I'd feared. The first few family dinners after that August morning were exactly as awkward as he'd promised they'd be, long silences, careful subject changes, my mother working overtime to fill every gap with talk of casseroles and church gossip. But awkward wasn't the same as broken. By October, Dean was calling Eli again like nothing had changed, the two of them falling back into their old rhythm of bad jokes and worse fishing advice, except now, every so often, Dean would glance at me across the room with a small, private nod, like he was checking that I was still okay. Still happy. Still exactly where I wanted to be. He asked me once, over Sunday dinner in late October, if Eli made me happy. Just that, quiet, between passing the mashed potatoes and reaching for his glass, like it was an ordinary question a brother might ask. Yeah, I told him. He really does. Good. Dean nodded, and that was the whole conversation, and somehow it meant more than 100 longer ones could have. I went home again for Thanksgiving, the whole family gathered around the table the way we had been every year of my life, except this year there was a new chair pulled up beside mine, and nobody blinked at it. My mother said grace and thanked God, among other things, for family, all of it, she said, every shape it comes in, and I caught Eli's eye across the table and felt my chest go warm and full in a way I hadn't let myself imagine, back in July, when all of this had felt like something we might have to keep buried forever. After dinner, once the dishes were cleared and my father had fallen asleep in his recliner in front of a football game nobody was watching, Eli found me out on the back porch, the same porch where he'd once taken my hand in the open for the first time. The air had gone cold enough that our breath showed, and he draped his jacket over my shoulders without being asked, the way he'd been doing small, unremarkable, caring things for months now, none of them dramatic, all of them adding up to something enormous. Remember the storm? He asked, leaning against the porch rail beside me, looking out at the dark tree line the way we had that first night. Every detail. I keep thinking about how scared I was that night. Not of the storm. Of you. Of what it would mean if I actually said out loud what I'd been carrying around for 2 years. He shook his head slowly, a small smile pulling at his mouth. I almost didn't come over that night, you know that. I sat in my truck outside my apartment for 20 minutes trying to talk myself out of it. What changed your mind? I figured if I didn't do it then, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering. He turned to face me fully, his expression open in that way I'd come to know as entirely his, unguarded, warm, sure of itself now in a way it hadn't dared to be that first night. Best decision I ever made. Better than the time you taught me to drive stick. Marginally better. You still owe me for that light pole. I laughed, and he pulled me in against his chest, and we stood there together on the porch while the cold settled in around us and the sound of the football game murmured faintly through the window behind us, and I thought about the boy I'd been at 14, watching him from a distance and aching for something I didn't have words for yet. I thought about the 6 years of silence, the storm, the candlelight, the terror of Dean's face in that kitchen doorway, all of it, every hard, frightening, uncertain piece of the road that had led to this exact moment, his arms around me on a porch I'd known my whole life. None of it had been easy. I wouldn't have wished the fear or the hiding or the ache of those early years on anyone. But standing there, warm despite the cold, certain in a way I'd never let myself be certain of anything, I understood that every hard year had simply been the long, quiet approach to this, to a love that didn't need candlelight to survive anymore, that could stand in the open, in the cold, in front of the whole family, and just be exactly what it was. I love you, I told him, plainly, the way I'd never quite managed to say it that first night. Not just because of the storm. Because of every ordinary day since. Eli tipped my chin up and kissed me, slow and certain, no fear left in it at all, and somewhere behind us the porch light flickered on against the coming dark, warm and steady, the way it always had been, the way I hoped it always would be. Thank you for staying with Caleb and Eli's story from the first candlelit kiss to the very last porch light. If it moved you, hit subscribe and drop a like, it genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like this one.